I've been betrayed and hurt so often. Why should I dare to hope that Christianity is true? Hi, my name is Ted Rosenblatt, and I'm here with my father, Dr. Rod Rosenblatt, and this is Talks with Dad Rod. I had a conversation recently with somebody online, always kind of poking around social media and interacting with people, and I got to hear a story about this guy with his coworker, about who is not a believer. And what came back was a pretty strong statement of his position on Christians. And I'll read that here in a moment. But the question remains that's a pretty hard yes or no kind of question.
Yep.
It makes sense. People are struggling in this kingdom a lot.
Yep.
And one of the struggles is whether they should believe or not. And you don't know what's in their past. And it's easy to run into or stumble into this scenario that has nothing to do with you, but the sum of total of their experiences says,
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And then you can unwittingly become the lightning rod of whatever the other stuff is that has nothing to do with you.
Yep. In many cases, the presentation that they've heard of Christianity, visiting church or something like that, reminds them of their own past, and it also can be that they've been scammed before on some product, bought something on an empty promise. Peter writes in 1 Peter to the Christians, but always be prepared to give a reasoned defense for the hope that is within you, yet do it with gentleness. So it was a command to Christians to be able to tell in a coherent way why you're a Christian. Now, very basically, we know from the book of Acts that the early approach to their fellow Jews, they were all Jews, to their fellow Jews was Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament prophecies that were speaking of the Messiah. He fulfilled them. To us Gentiles, outsiders, nobodies, goy, the promise is that amazingly you can be, on the basis of Christ, grafted in or adopted into as if you were a child of Abraham. Ephesians spends a lot of time on that. The amazing thing is that the two peoples are welded together. And I didn't realize till I read a commentary, our whole history of slavery in the U.S., black-white, nowhere near what it was in the first century, Jew, non-Jew.
In Rome?
Yeah, any Gentile as opposed to children of Abraham. Tremendous antipathy. I had no idea. So when Paul announces that based on Christ's death, that he is making it possible for two people to be made into one, he's talking about what sounded to them like the impossible.
I'm going to go rescue them too.
Yes. They're going to
say, wait a minute, but we're the special people.
That's right. That's exactly right. And there are examples in the book of Acts where even Peter got hornswoggled and was dining and eating with Gentiles. And then when he heard their group was coming from Jerusalem, he withdrew from eating with the Gentiles. And Paul accuses him to his face. He says, "You're gutless. You lost your guts. You lost your courage. When somebody from Jerusalem was coming, you withdrew from eating with the Gentiles." And Paul was right.
Well, it compares to Jesus sitting with sinners. And what did the Sanhedrin accuse him of?
Yep.
For doing the very thing.
Yep. Eating with the rabble.
Those are scum. What are you doing? This guy everybody is taking so highly and listening to.
Yeah. Yeah. So even ethnicity, Jewish and Gentile, says the New Testament, have been broken down by the crucifixion, death, resurrection of Christ. And he's out to create one people in him by adoption, in the Gentile case, and by fulfillment in the case of the Jews.
All who would believe regardless of origin.
Correct.
So coming back to the original question, it sort of taps in one of the things that come into play in a situation like this, where you're actually having a conversation with potentially an antagonistic unbeliever who's not open to what you're going to say.
Right.
If you were to say something like this, I tend to do it slowly. I tend to not have such discussions easily with unbelievers. I tend to just try to be good and helpful to them and not talk about my faith. I just leave it in the background. And it seems to have done well. I kind of take it, I kind of laugh when they'll say to me sometimes, I didn't know you were a Christian.
Yes.
Because that's not what I do. I don't go parading it. But the point is that I want them to at least feel like I'm on their side, and I'm not here to somehow, again, betray them, which is where the question comes from.
Yeah. Or
I'm going to hornswoggle them like I'm waiting him to get into position, and now I'm going to jump him.
Yep.
Or something.
Yep.
And one of the questions that was put to the guy I was reading was about forgiveness. So you think you can just make mistakes and you just go ask for forgiveness and everything's going to be fine? And then the guy essentially says, yeah, I mean, that's basically what I do. And here was the response. I'm going to read this. That's why I don't believe that God crap. It wasn't actually the word used. Pulling it back a little bit. You guys think you can do whatever you want and it'll be good as long as you ask to be forgiven for what you screw up. We have a deep sense of fairness.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't seem fair to old Adam, which is, that is the voice of old Adam, and we all have it. It's in the church also, that if we aren't doing penance, if we aren't getting on a knee and we aren't doing like Martin Luther did and scrubbing floors, if we aren't doing something to erase the bad, sinful stuff off our record, then it's just a free pass. And why would I want to believe in a God that's just going to let you get away with all that terrible stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And I so badly want to say, this is the only way.
Yeah. Yeah. What if there were what you're calling a free pass? What if there were such a thing? Costly to God, but not to you. High cost to God. Wouldn't that sound kind of attractive? Given what you and I both are?
Just believe in me and I'll bring you in.
Uh-huh.
Just trust me.
Yeah. Now, I wish I could say that you can go to any non-Roman church and hear that every Sunday. I can't. You've got to pick a church where the pastor is consciously preaching from the text of the Bible and interpreting it according to the promise of the Messiah or the fulfillment of the promise in the New Testament era, that God had fulfilled his promise in Jesus Christ to your benefit and not to your cost.
One of the most offensive parts of the whole thing, both for unbelievers and for many of the, what I consider sort of religious lawyers, is that Jesus' work is sufficient to save.
Mm-hmm.
The sufficiency that he did all. When he says it is finished, he means it.
Yep.
It means all the work that's necessary to save has been completed.
Yep.
All of it.
Yep.
The work we do now after his perfect work is just to help each other through this.
Yep. For the benefit of the neighbor. God doesn't need it.
That the law demands perfection, requires that my works for my neighbor are perfect. And when they are sinful, and they are, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not, they are condemnable. It needs to be perfect. That means, which is to say it's perfect that I don't have any ulterior motive in what I'm doing, for instance. So I would like to be in good with my neighbor and have them see and think well of me, highly of me.
Yep.
So I will go help them with something at their house or make myself available to babysit or run an errand when somebody is sick or something like that. It isn't, we want to think that we are being purely
benevolent.
benevolent, not selfish in any way, that there's no benefit that I get in any possible way. We're always working on a balance sheet in our sin.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
Yep.
It's never pure motive.
Forget purity.
It's gone. and it's hard for us to admit to ourselves. We will sit there and say, no, I don't think so, Ted. No, I think I was pure of motive over there. I think I was pure of motive over there. He who says he was without sin is, it's not a good thing. Once we recognize that everything we do is somehow tainted by sin, then we can start to see that there is no working our way out of this condition in any way. And actually all we're doing
that's important.
And all we're doing is making it worse. We're just stacking sin on sin. If we don't have a Jesus that's sufficient to save for those who will sin and do sin, even in their faith.
Yep.
Just like the apostles.
Yep.
Right in front of him. Then there's no hope for us.
Correct.
It's got to be Jesus, start to finish, because we sin, even when we believe.
So if you're looking for a church, find one that holds that sort of message and quotes the scriptures to back it up. And if the church isn't doing that, leave it. Find one that does. And
sometimes these days, you've got to listen to some stuff on the internet first. And we know some people who have struggled to find anything like this anywhere within their driving area. So we know what the problem is. We know, and we're hoping with what we're doing at 1517 to basically reignite the Reformation.
Yep.
Try not to use too many RE words, but it's fun. Going back to the reformational theology that Martin Luther was doing, and coming back to the gospel as rediscovered in the works of St. Paul, and we can again come back to the gospel in the church.
Yep.
Which is the cornerstone. Jesus and his gospel is the cornerstone of the church. Hope this is helpful for you, and that this brings you peace, and hopefully lifts something off of you that might be a little heavy. And come to 1517.org for more, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us on Talks with Dad Rod, part of the 1517 Podcast Network. This podcast and all 1517's content is made possible through financial support by listeners just like you. Please visit 1517.org for more, and please consider clicking on the donate button and making a recurring or one-time contribution to help us share this good news in a world which so desperately needs it.